Welcome to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzaro-Mosi Thurlow scale,
or MOTS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode.
Hello, and welcome back to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV, and we're back on Comedy Month, where we're featuring Mel Brooks comedies. Today we're doing The 12 Chairs, and I am Chris Morgan, and I'm here with my compatriots, I'm here with my comrades, Stephen Ormosi.
Heyo.
And comrade Scott Thurlow. I'm really fucking this up, sorry.
You sure are, but I am still in search of my family jewels, so the quest continues.
So, does anybody have a funny log line before we continue?
Yeah, in Russia, jewels hide from you. I don't know.
Nice.
All right, and Steve-O, would you like to tell us about the plot?
Yeah. Character finds out that a treasure is hidden in a chair that he once owned that he no longer has possession of, one of a set of 12. He goes back to his old family home, which he was driven out of by the revolution, to try and find the treasure. And as he whittles down the choices of it keeps being a smaller and smaller amount of chairs that he can find, and as he whittles them down, he and his compadre over there, those who's it played by? Lou
Frank something is
Frank
the main
Langella.
guy.
Frank Langella,
yeah. Is kind of like a con artist, I guess, trying to get
he's
the
a
money.
drifting rogue, pretty much.
Yeah. He realized he gets wind of this and is also trying to get the money out of the chairs. So it's basically about those two on their various adventures and smashing a bunch of chairs apart and not finding anything.
Chairscapade.
And also, Dom Deluise is a priest who has debearded himself and is trying to find the same chairs, but almost at the very beginning of the movie is put off the scent, and he spends most of the movie chasing the wrong chairs and getting into various Dom DeLuisian adventures. So
his part's the most comedic in quotes part of it.
It really is, and there were a bunch of parts that I thought were really funny, but his whole segment of the movie doesn't need to be here, really. But so yeah, I mean, by the end, they find all the chairs. Turns out the jewels that they were looking for were not in them and had been used years before to create a nice
well, they were in them. They just got found well before they found them.
Yeah, once they got there, they found all the chairs, they were no longer there, and the money had been used for community projects and
for
things.
glorious community center, comrade.
So the movie ends with basically the two of them begging on the streets and
Running scams.
Yeah, scamming on the streets, I suppose. So yeah, I mean, it's 2. It's fine. There are parts of this where I was like, that didn't need to be in the movie, but it's kind of funny. And there were parts of this where I was like, that didn't really need to be in the movie, and it's not actually very funny at all. So there's no point of this. But for the most part, I thought it was pretty good, and it was more of the jokes were in service of the plot as opposed to the plot being in service of the jokes, I guess. For
the most part,
Brooks.
yeah, I feel you.
It was less jokes focused than most Mel Brooks movies that I've seen. And I would assume that's because it's kind of earlier on in his career. It came out in 1970. So, if you watch this, you will notice a difference between this and Spaceballs or something. It's a very different vibe. But still, I think it gets a 2. I liked the storyline between the two main characters. I thought it was really pretty well done, and there were some really touching, beautiful moments scripted in there. So That's going to go to characters as well as plot, but I think that it's worth a mention here. So a 2 for me.
Yeah, that's fair. Alternately, Chris, my log lines could be something like "It's a mad, mad, mad Russia," or like it sort of like feels like a sort of in that vein, like almost like I wrote down like kind of like vaguely almost a Hitchcockian-ish kind of parody, where it's like three characters, two team up and in a treasure, and like hijinks and farces happen, but also like you said, Sivo, very human moments happen along the way as well. And it's sort of like a tragedy at the end because they don't get the stuff and they're ended up basically, like you said, scamming, begging on the streets, like running the scam that they came up with before in order to finance their chair chase, if you will. So all that to say, like, yeah, it carries itself along. I'd go like a 1.75 that rounds up to a 2. Like, it's perfectly fine. You're right. There are a few scenes here and there that we can say maybe in style or something, be like, yeah, either it went on a little too long or like they kind of could have chopped that out, like edited a bit. Even so, it's only like an hour and a half long film, anyways. So yeah, I'm gonna go with like a solid-ish middle of the ground 2, but perfectly fine.
I agree with you guys. I'm gonna go with the 2. I would love this era of Mel Brooks. This is my favorite era because he is well, funny enough, he actually did produce and the composer for this did the music for all of his stuff in here, but he also did The Elephant Man, the David Lynch film. Mel Brooks produced it. The composer who worked with Mel Brooks apparently throughout his career, as I was looking, we'll get to when we get to style. Um, but I kind of see like now watching this, I kind of see like this is the beginning of his era, and like producing Elephant Man was kind of like the end, because then he moves on to his more slapstick era that began with History of the World, and then moving on from there. So this is like one of my favorite. This is like my favorite era of his because, as we discussed with Young Frankenstein, I mean, it's not only a really funny film; it's just a good film. Um, and I think, well, all right, I take that back with a little slapstick because with Blazing Saddles and High Anxiety, but it's kind of he kind of it's there's always these elements. I wouldn't even quite say social commentary as much
There's
as,
a bit of it though.
yeah, a bit, not like a kind of, I guess the social commentary is just that it's about this society or that society, or without making any grand statements, not that I'm opposed to it. um but I quite enjoyed um their journey. The reason I'm really giving it a 2 is because I kind of have a couple of, I feel like I got a weird sense of how time flowed in this, because Dom because they're in Dom DeLuise in Siberia trying to get chairs from this couple in the middle of the snowstorm. They kick him out, and then he kind of ends up somewhere else, which is a nicer climate. And there's a couple there talking, eating cold borscht, saying they're so glad they got transferred to a warmer climate. And I'm like, is that the couple that just kicked him
Same
out in
couple.
Siberia?
Yes.
Um,
It absolutely was.
what I'm saying is it was keeping track of the time, because they showed when Franklin Jella and the two main characters are going to Moscow. You see their journey through the different kinds of weather, but it's keeping track of time was difficult in this, and I don't know if that was important to him, but it kind of made me, it would kind of lose me here and there. um so yeah, I'm giving it a fine 2. Like I said, I quite enjoyed the journey. I enjoyed the characters. um yeah, that's about it.
I, see, I feel I feel you. I think we should return to it though in style because I do think what you said there does play into part, but I think it's more style than plot. So just earmark that.
Yeah, I'm
The
just
other guy who you were trying to remember, Chris, is played by Ron Moody.
yes.
I like his name is like Vorobyanov or something. Like it's very
Voronovich, something. It's very very Russian.
Yeah. um yeah, like I said, I was trying not to delve too much into style, but kind of like explaining why I wanted to give it a 2. And
I feel you.
okay. So, all right. So it's going to be twos all around, which moves us to Steve-O with plot.
What?
Nope.
Nope. Sorry. It moves us to, sorry. It moves us to Scott with themes.
Speaking of weird time jumps, buddy. Anyways,
Yeah.
I mean,
Sorry.
so another one of my jokes, or maybe like if he was here, be like, "There's no war but class war," and it's not really like about that, but like you said, Chris, it does touch on that because, sorry, Chris, or Steve, the older gentleman's name, Voloshlakash, he was deposed.
I think it's Vorobyanov.
Verbanov, sure. We'll call him Mr. V. He was like basically a deposed aristocrat, like you said, and this is set like post-revolution, whatever. So, I mean, he's trying to get his wealth back. The opening scene is his mother-in-law, his dying mother-in-law, is like, by the way, I hid a bunch of jewels in one of the family dining room chair sets. So he goes to track it down, and this roguish guy, young rogue, like sort of ne'er do well, gets wind of it, and then they but sort of not forced to team up, but they end up teaming up. And I mean, it's sort of divide there because there's a big scene where later on he's like, "Hey, I had to beg my whole life. This is how I grew up. This is how I live." So it's a class social divide there, and I think that's a big part of it because both characters sort of represent that's one side of that.
Mhm.
So
And then you got
like
Dom DeLuise representing the clergy.
yeah, and then Dominique's like, I guess not a corrupt priest, but like he also gets wind because he comes to take the dying woman's confession, and then I guess either hears it or she must have told him or whatever. It's implied that she told him on her deathbed as well. So whatever. So now they're chasing down like old money, essentially old wealth riches,
Yeah.
each coming from a different portion of society and class. So I think that's like very obviously there. It's not necessarily hammered in your face, but it certainly is more than outright addressed in the film. So I think that's one of, if not the major theme, and I think it was handled pretty well. And then sure, you got like the comedy, like the jokes that arise like from that divide that are there as well. But I still think it's very deeply rooted in that. And like I said, the characters represent that and portray, their sort of backgrounds quite well. So I think that is the major theme here. Like it's not really like giving you an answer. It's just like, hey, life sucks. It happens, like you chase dreams and riches doesn't always work out, and you got to make do with what you have in your lot in life. And sure, you might have been rich one time, but you can't get that back, and you can try to aspire to sort of con your way into it, but that might not work out all that well either. So I think I'm just saying like those are the two or three major things. They're sort of all wound into one Barthian braid, more or less, I would say. And I think they're all pretty well addressed, and the through line runs throughout the film and the story fairly well. It never like drops it or never like goes on any weird tangents, or again, if it does, it's just for like a moment to do a joke or whatever. So yeah, I think it all works really well, and I think I'll give it a pretty strong one. In fact, like you said, Chris, it's not my personal favorite era of Brooks films, but I think he was more ground. Like it's not as slapsticky as you said, Steve, as well as like Spaceballs or something, or even Men in Tights from last week. So I think it's again has a more grittiness to it that you don't really see in the latter Brooks stuff. But I do think it's welded together quite nicely, and I'm giving it a pretty strong one.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's that class warfare thing comes into it for sure, and also like circumstances make strange bedfellows for sure. Like
No,
these two would never be friends, and in fact, they're not really friends for most of the movie, but they have like a you know Bender. I think his name is Ben Ostep Langella's character. His name is Ostep Bender. He's got like this almost parasitic relationship to the guy whose money he's trying to get, basically, and he's like, well, I won't tell the secret police if I can wet my beak. And then
capitalist.
The idea of like chasing down these riches of previous bygone era of like life or whatever, or your old life, I think plays into it as well. So yeah, I think the themes are pretty strong on this. In fact, I think this is one of the strongest in terms of themes Mel Brooks movies. I will give it a 1.
There was I remember when I was a kid, I saw an interview or something with Mel Brooks. Apparently, one of his first short films had to do with like the reversal of lobsters and humans. And the lobsters went to a restaurant and picked up these. It was kind of surreal, and they picked out humans from a human tank. So when I walked into this, I knew his propensity to kind of like what is it? You kind of through humor from like playing things really straight. So when we got to the beginning of it, I'm like, okay, so we're going the drama route of it, when the teaser, when Dom DeLuise, is leaving the house, all as soon as I saw Dom DeLuise, I'm like, oh fuck, this is we're definitely not in any kind of major surreal territory. But he's like, okay, go take care of her, and he shoves the lady back in and slams the door, and then the song kicks in. I can't remember it now. I've been singing off.
Hope for the best, but
expect the worst,
plan
hope for the
worst.
best. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this really bizarre. It kind of in a weird way parallels a redemption arc, for the aristocrat whose name begins with a V, Ron Moody's character,
Mr. V.
Yeah, and at the end, it's kind of, and I like, and at the end, he just kind of goes from like being, it's kind of like a reverse thing. He goes from his aspirations of, in one way or another, returning to uh his status through money and have that back, where he's kind of like, okay, I'm a beggar now. I like the themes quite a bit. I agree with you, they're very, very strong. I just noticed that there's this like, I the weird kind of like reverse redemption arc and so forth.
I get what you mean.
No, I like it very much. I'm going to give it a 1. Okay, so that moves me with Antagonist. That's a really good question, because again, this is not one of these things where we can blame anything. It's more like, it is kind of more like it's a mad, 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 mad world, where we are chasing a MacGuffin, and the MacGuffin is kind of like the antagonist, and it's also kind of a shell game. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff out there, but it's also kind of like a weird shell game, because everybody's chasing these chairs, and you don't know until you get them and tear them apart whether or not you got the right chair. So while it is not like actually personified, it's kind of weird. I've given ones to antagonists with being a more of a conceptual thing, but whether an antagonist is a MacGuffin in a game in a shell game, I'm not really sure. They were all definitely antagonized by it, but I'm not really sure if it was that much of a presence, or if they were each other's antagonists. But again, that would, as we learned with Young Frankenstein, that might, bleed into protagonists. So I've talked myself right down the middle on this one. I want to hear what you guys think.
I think it could be a little both of what you said there, Chris. Like, yeah, I mean, eh, they are, because of the social divide. They're sort of antagonistic at first. Like, basically, Ostrov blackmails Mr. V into like helping, and like you said, like he's like, now that I know that you have buried family treasure, like, former glory, former opulence, like hidden away. I'll help you find it if I get a cut of it, and I won't report you. And that's like sort of like you said, Steve, where they're thrown together now as like strange bedfellows to work together towards it. But yeah, Chris, they're also like trying, like the somewhat farcical nature of it is like they have to figure out where the chairs are. Oh, some of them in a museum. Oh, now they're in a production company, right? So like they're like just going around Russia trying to track them all down and smash them up when they get to them, and keep not finding the jewels. And maybe you could be said like the incorporeal part of it is like trying to regain former lost dreams or glory, like that's never coming back. Like you can't go home again, essentially. Like I don't know. I think it's like sort of a modernism versus like classicism divide in a sense, to get like a little highbrow. But I do think like the characters were antagonized by some of these things, if not both, at to various strengths at various times throughout the story. So I don't think it's like devoid of antagonism. And yeah, you're right. I do agree also, Chris, that perhaps a la Young Frankenstein, some of it flows into themselves as protagonists, like sort of trip themselves up with their aspirations and with their grand scheming and all this. But I do think like the MacGuffin does in fact serve as some sort of idea of an antagonist to them, while they themselves are antagonized by each other. Like I said, at various in a sine wavy way throughout the story as it unfolds. So I think you can give sort of cut it up both ways, put them both in sort of again a ball of antagonism, and have them maybe like a point five each equaling a 1. That's sort of how I'm looking at it. So what do you think, Steve-O?
Well, probably like I was gonna say, I think that like the priest Dom DeLuise's character is like the most like embodies the standard protect or antagonist role like the most, but he's like gotten rid of like shipped on his own movie time bus like fucking
Yeah, he's outwitted
so early in the movie
early.
that he's not all that antagonistic towards them. Um, in terms of like them being each other's antagonists, I don't know if I buy that so much. Like it's the whole movie is about their character arcs and they become friends and to the point where they are, running scams at the end of the movie together.
Right, but they were
So-
antagonistic to each other at first, is all I'm saying. Like they
Sure.
that's their arc. So yeah,
but that
it's a
means
little-
that they're not antagonistic throughout the entire movie, which I would give a 0 for sure. As far as the chairs or like the MacGuffin, like the jewels themselves being the antagonist, I think that's what really drove them the most. But I don't know if I'm like don't get me wrong, I think they felt antagonized in this movie. I just don't think there's like a strong antagonist focal point so much in the movie. I don't think it really needed it, but I'm also like, that being said, I think I'm going to give Antagonist a 0 for that reason.
I see it.
Like I think that this movie did fine with how it portrayed the antagonism of these two characters, but I don't think there was ever like, here's where the strong antagonism is coming from, and like that's what it is for me. So I think that's why I'm going to go with a 0 on this question.
No, that's fair. You're right. I didn't even mention the Don DeLuise priest character. Like again, he's sort of like the B plot. Like, and even
Yeah,
lampshade. That's something in my notes where like, like I mentioned Hitchcockian. It felt like again like detective-ish sort of like heist thing. And they're like, what is this detective film like or something? Like they said something like that early on. And yeah, like I get it, Steve. Like I said, to me, it's some of it is them being antagonists to each other, but not all. And then some of it's them just like getting the frustrations of life when they fail at getting the jewels, which is again the MacGuffin thing they've been chasing. So I guess you're saying you're giving it a soft 0, and I totally see that. Maybe I'm just giving it a soft 1, just enough. So
fair enough. I like it because Chris wanted us to decide for him, and we were like, "Fuck you, man."
That's what I'm saying. So Chris, where does that leave you? Does that help you out either way?
It leaves me looking for a coin. Dude, this is going to come down to a coin flip. All right, I'm going to flip a pick. Turtle is heads, blank is tails.
All right. Blank being 0.
Yeah, blank being 0. Thank you.
Blank 0.
Now it leads me to like decide which side means what.
There he goes. He's flipping
And
down
it's
there.
good radio,
and I'm
guys.
giving it a soft 1.
All right.
Soft 1. All right.
Turtle it is. Turtle's all the way down for a 1.
Turtles all the way down.
Yeah, you guys couldn't even be polarized. It's like just slightly on either side of it. I'm like, great. Because like I agree with both. I'm like, fuck.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a strength of the film because you can get you can sort of anchor it both ways, and it makes sense either way. So, I don't know.
All right, Chris, what's next?
Okay, so that brings us back to Steve-O with protagonist.
Yeah, so I think it's the two characters, V guy and Ostip,
Old man aristocrat and young man drifter,
and young man Langella. I really love these characters. I loved how they interacted with each other. I loved how they interacted with like the other people that they came into contact with on their journeys. I thought that they had amazing character arcs. I thought that the actors did great jobs. I think that this is perhaps the strongest part of this movie is how good these two were together and how well they acted off each other and how good the script was for them. So I mean, I don't think I need to go on and on, but I think that they're really strong, and I'm going to give them a 1.
No, I agree. It was like they're like the heart of the film, clearly, and yeah, like again, because of the nature of their characters, and you're right, the scripting, and the character work on them is quite good. It's like they're believable, and like it makes sense to the story, and like it's sort of like a classic Odd Couple thing in a sense, but framed through sort of the classism, like I mentioned earlier. And yes, it was the portrayals, the acting was all it elevated it quite a bit. So yeah, I think it was a good journey, a good, again, weird buddy film in terms of the plot, events and elements that we already mentioned, and that the characters and as protagonists, they did have great arcs, I think, and learn something about themselves, even if something they didn't want to learn, or about life
Sure.
in general. So yeah, I think maybe along with themes, or at least near it, I'm giving Protag a pretty strong one.
It is because of Ron Moody's character that I thought it was kind of like a bizarre redemption arc, because I love, like, one of my favorite parts that just says so much about that character was that when they were when they were doing when they were actor when they posed to be actors on that ship, and there was a theater, and he was supposed to play a member of the aristocracy, and he's like, oh, I could do this, blah blah blah, and he walks out on stage and sees the audience, and he just wide-eyed
Keeps walking.
goes right through it. And as I said, it's just such a great, what you guys said, them playing off each other was just such a great thing. Like, it's like they're, in a lot of ways, Langella keeps flipping between pushing him and pulling him. And that was the one part that stuck out to me, where he's just like, I've got this, I've been in this society and all this stuff, and it's like he finally steps up and walks on stage, just like, holy shit. So yeah, I agree with you guys. These two characters are fantastic, and I'm giving this a very strong one.
Amen.
Cool. All right, so it's ones all around, which brings us to Scott with supporting.
So I guess this is dependent upon. I mean, if you count Dom DeLuise as part of the antagonist, then I mean, other than him, there are no really side characters. Like, I mean, there are, but they show up just for moments, basically in the background, more or less. Like the couple that he goes to Siberia, who, when one of the plot twists, if you will, is that the road, like Frank Langella, sort of masquerades as a like official. Like, one of the jokes is that they go to like this big bureaucratic institution, and it's like all these doors, like the apartment, like when they repossess all the possession, everyone's stuff is like cabinet of just tables, cabinet of just furniture, like, oh, and this is the the chair cabinet or whatever,
Yeah.
the chair office or whatever. So he goes there to find the records of where the chairs actually were sent. Meanwhile, Don DeLuise shows up, and then unbeknownst does not know that he's being tricked, scammed by Frank, right? So he's like, oh yeah, he's like, they're in Siberia, good luck finding them. So this whole little plot, right? Like, so, like, yeah, like, again, most if not all of like the actual hardcore comedic relief comes from Dom DeLuise's character as the priest, bumbling around trying to track it all down and getting thrown off and just being a fool, pretty much. So, like, that's fine, I guess. But like the couple he goes to find are amusing, I suppose. They even come back in the scene, but again, they're just sort of there. They are a plot device, just like the theater guys kind of are, like the theater manager and like the director or whatever. Like, yes, they're there. There's a museum curator. Like, they overhear him be like, okay, we're shipping the chairs to wherever, and that's like kicks off the next, chair race, if you will, of their trekking. So I'm not really sure. Like, it comes down to whether or not we're gonna say Don DeLuise is inside character, because if he is, he's the most important one, the most well-rounded, fleshed out one. So yeah, that'll be a one. But if not, the rest are just, again, sort of background there to make some jokes, to move the plot along, but not really our characters. Don't have much weight or anything behind them unto themselves. So maybe I'm a little wavery, but basically that's the question in my mind. So with that, what do you guys make of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true for the most part. Mel Brooks's character is probably the second most,
Yeah,
the second most screen time.
He's the old man servant who, like, drunkenly there at the old estate, and like he's only
Yeah.
there for one scene, really. So
Well, he has one big scene with Langella before.
right.
We're talking to him before about, like, oh, everybody calls me comrade now, like, and then they had that thing happened a couple years ago, the revolution. Yeah, that was it.
Yeah.
And then he has the scene with Ron Moody's character in the basement or whatever. So he's got a couple like good scenes,
Yes.
and I think he's a pretty solid side character. And the couple, and yeah, you're right. For the most part, that's, I guess, the mother-in-law in the beginning.
She's just a plot device too, like to kick it all off. Like, she's not really. She has like some
Yeah, I
kind.
mean, like that's
She's a
all
dying mother-in-law. Like that's her
That's all
character.
supporting characters usually are in Mel Brooks movies. I feel like are just like joke characters for the most part,
Right.
but or or move the plot along characters. But like he I like that he imbues them with some, like especially later on. I guess like some of the side supporting characters are a lot more have their own kind of energy. But yeah, I mean, I'll say that Dom DeLuise is not is a supporting character in this. And that said, I will give it a 1 because I think he's by himself is good enough for a 1, and then the rest are fine too. They're just no big standouts or anything like any crazy character development or anything.
I agree with you. It's definitely Dom DeLuise is the main supporting character, but the thing I like about, and yeah, this is the job of a supporting character, that they're plot devices, but the mother-in-law, and then especially Mel Brooks is being the valet, or the manservant or whatever, who is he said he didn't hit me all that often. um it's kind of like I think those were important to Ron Moody's character, insofar as it just showed you what kind of gravitas he had, that he is looking to regain, at least through the fortune. So I'm gonna give them a little, they're gonna be right down the mid. I'm gonna give them supporting characters a little more than a plot device. But yeah, I think Dom DeLuise is the big supporting character. The two of them maybe equal one supporting character. So yeah, it's getting 1.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a good way to cut it up. Like I said, like it's if not that, that'd be the reason to do it. So I think I will err on the side of that. And yeah, the rest of them like mostly him, right? And then the rest are like sort of vague icing there on the cake, like decoration that rounds it all out. So yeah,
All right, so we're getting ones all around,
I think so.
and it comes to me with dialogue. Um, yes, I'm giving this a 1. It's just I really like I like the dialogue. And I think a lot of it has to do with the delivery, but I also like how Dostoevsky played a part in one of their schemes. That he
That's
was
style to me, but it is
that
funny.
that he was sitting under his, has the kind of thinker pose, and Ron Moody's character is under it. But Dom DeLuise's character's name, Father Fyodor, which is Dostoevsky's first name,
Right.
and it's got a lot of those
Yep.
kind of little Mel Brooks things that really um even his more slapsticky times, and where he gets more obvious, where his humor overall gets a little more obvious, and pop culture current. He does have he always, to his dialogue, always has an intelligence to it. It's not like like I said, and I don't mean that to be detracting when he goes to, like, when I'm it's a little easier to, when you get into the late 80s and early 90s, to be like, current with pop culture in a lot of these, in a lot of the movies. um so that was not a dig. I was at basically saying that, having glibs of intelligent, of actual ideas in your comedy and your in your dialogue, and it doesn't have to be
Mhm.
overt, but it's like the small little things that, like, to me, make it work. And I enjoyed the delivery of the dialogue, but I really thoroughly enjoyed the dialogue, so I'm giving it a 1.
I'm not sure how to fall on this one because I'm not saying it was shitty or bad or anything. Like maybe just comparing it to like, the more again Brooksian stuff. Like because it is more, like I said, it is more ground, like down to earth and based in reality, not just like as out there as his latter stuff can be. Like, so maybe just because like I wasn't expecting that, it was a little off-putting. But again, it itself was not bad, and like you said, Steve, scripting, the script itself was quite solid as hell and delivered well by the characters, and it all made sense. So maybe I'm just like unfairly comparing it to like go like, having my expectations like not quite be what it ended up being for this film, because this is like it's a rather unknown, lesser known Brooks film anyways, and earlier like we said. So yeah, he's still sort of maybe figuring out his style. Like you definitely see kernels of like the Brooksian stuff that would come out much later, like and as his career went on. So yeah, like I'm not saying I hated it or anything like that, like, but I still might give it a soft 0. But a soft 1 is perfectly fine too. So I don't know. Turn your fucking phone off and give me your opinion on this, Steve-O.
Goddamn work phone. Who's calling me right now? Yeah, I actually quite enjoyed the dialogue for this. It was not like I liked it almost because it wasn't what I was expecting from a Mel Brooks movie, and it wasn't that like slapsticky like
So just over the top, just like
yeah,
bonkers
the
all over.
outrageous, kind of stuff that he's known for. Like he has a couple moments of that in this movie, and you can like, oh yeah, I see that. I see Brooks in there, but like
I said, like
it's
Colonel's
before like he's still trying to make a movie without like a joke every 5 seconds or whatever, like, and I really liked it. Like I thought it was a refreshing, thing, take on, or not take, but like a refreshing, you know, side of Mel Brooks that I hadn't seen before, where he's like actually like trying to write some naturalistic dialogue as opposed to like everything's a setup for the next joke or whatever. So not that that's bad. I mean, he's very good at that too. But like I liked
all
seeing
that.
what's that?
It wasn't like entirely that, I guess.
Yeah, well, but like that's what I mean. I like seeing this different kind of writing out of him. I thought it was pretty solid. Especially there were some really good like speeches and stuff throughout. The Dostoevsky speech that you brought up. There's like the whole um, thing in the beginning with the mother-in-law. I thought was pretty good. Like just good character work and moments with them, and a lot of that I think came from the script. And then, but and you also saw like obvious Mel Brooks in like times where when they first meet and he's like, I'm leaving. He's like, why? He's like, go tell the police. And he's like, no, wait, you can't. And like it just keeps like going in circles and circles and circles until
That
he
was
tells them
very.
what he
You're
wants
right.
to
I
hear.
noticed that. That's super like classic, like Mel Brooks's style to the core.
But so you have a little bit of that, but for the most part, it's just like trying to be naturalistic dialogue, and I dug it. I thought it was good. I mean, your mileage may vary on that with Mel Brooks writing the dialogue, but I liked it, and I'm gonna give it a 1.
Yeah,
Here,
no, good.
I was gonna say, here's an example of what I was talking about, because even in the films of his that I don't like, there's always very great little plays and when Father Fyodor runs off and they're fighting with the chair, and it's just like, you're a clergyman. He's like, but aren't you a member of the Communist Party? He goes, yes. He goes, but communists are atheists. And it's just like he throws that back into it. It's always those little, like I said, the one thing I always love about his dialogue is there's always little even if it's obvious or not, there's always these little kernels of being aware of the societies. And I'm not really doing a good job of explaining this, but I'm hoping that interplane kind of is a way he brings up like a certain amount of reality into the absurdity. Let's put it that way.
Sure. I think you guys convinced me at the end of the day, like, yeah, it might be a soft 1, but I don't think I'd feel right giving it a 0, like outright. So it's fine. Like it's more than fine, really. Like we said, like, don't get me wrong. You're right. And just Steve, like, yeah, just to recap or reiterate, like, yeah, it might not be what you're expecting going into it, but that it does all make sense, and especially it rounds out the characters as well. And I will say this and notice this one thing, and you guys mentioned it. Now this is the third Mel Brooks film we've done for Comedy Month this year. Is that there's one part where Deluise is like, because he's a priest, he's like praying, he's like, oh God, please show me the way, what to do, and like he sees the chair goodbye, he's like, thank you.
Yeah.
And like, I just realized, like, I'm like, that was the thing in Robin Hood, like the same, he reused that there. So anyways, so yeah, like. Yeah. That's pretty good. So yeah, at the end of the day, like maybe soft 1, but certainly not a 0. So yeah, mark it down for me.
All right. So one's soft, one's all around, or one's all around. I think it's probably a little softer than ours. I did not mean that the way it sounded. So I'm going to shut up and give style to Steve-O.
All right. yeah, it's Mel Brooks. We've been talking about this. The other two movies we've done, it's early Mel Brooks, so it's not like doesn't feel quite the same. But I feel like none of his movies feel the same as like any of the other ones, necessarily like camera wise or like the shots. I feel like he's always trying to do something new with that. There's actually some really beautiful shots in this movie.
Yeah, agreed.
Uh, and like I love it for for that. The when they find out that when they have to go back to Moscow for the last chair because all the other 11 of them didn't have the jewels in it. There's a scene where they're walking and the sun's setting and there's like those trees. Oh man,
Man, I noticed.
I was
that.
like, holy shit, man! Like what a shot. And just stuff like that. So like there's a lot of cool stuff like that. Obviously it's Mel Brooks, so it's got a feel to it in terms of like the character interactions and how those the style of those, how they go. Like you can there's a way that Mel Brooks has people talk to each other and directs people to talk to each other that you can tell. Like you watch this and Robin Hood, Men in Tights, and you can tell that okay, the same guy was telling them how to like act with each other or whatever. Like there's 25 years apart. There's like something there. And yeah, I it's hard to give Mel Brooks a 0 on style. I don't think I would for like any of his movies that I've seen anyway. So I'm gonna give it a 1.
Yeah, I
The
mean, you're right.
great thing about, I'm sorry, Scott.
You good? You good?
The great thing I love about Mel Brooks, and you can like him a film or not, and you cannot. I don't think he's ever really made the same film twice. He may have gone slapsticky in a way, but he's never, in my opinion, you can see a clear line of succession from this,
Yeah,
and then you see something like this, and then it and Young Frankenstein, and yeah, all of a sudden it makes sense that he would produce like The Elephant Man. And speaking of shots, the one shot for me that always stands out is when they're going back to Moscow and they're crossing the train tracks when it's snowing. And I'm not sure if that was the natural light or if he put a blue filter on it, but wow, what a shot. What a fucking shot. And the music, this composer, I could tell right away that his next film was Young Frankenstein. I quite enjoyed the music. And yeah, I'm giving it a very strong one.
Yeah, so two things. You're right. Like I absolutely noticed that. Like again, it was. It's gonna sound like a backhanded compliment, but it felt and looked more like a quote unquote real movie. Like, and not to say there's other ones don't. Just maybe just the fact that he was shooting like to make it. I don't know if they shot it in Russia or like supposed to be it, but it didn't matter because it just looked very, very excellently like it, right? And like the wide nature shots, like you said, Steve, like that was just not surprising. Don't quite often see, or maybe just expect to think to see in a Mel Brooks comedy-ish movie. But again, this was an early one, so he's sort of maybe experimenting or trying things out. Yeah, I think it all worked. Like now, Chris, the thing I wanted to come back to was, yeah, the time, like there was a weird, like, not weird, but some of the transitions, juxtapositions between scenes could feel here and there a little abrupt, like a little like okay, like got cut off, and then other times like a scene or two might drag on just a little bit, like but that's sort of like the nitpicky stuff, like sort of few and far between. Just that I did notice how composed many of the shots were versus like what you normally think of or what has become like probably what the zeitgeist sees as the Mel Brooksian style, if you will. But yeah, and the score is very good. Of course, it starts off with like a vaguely humorous song, like as Mel Brooks is wont to do, and that's fine, and it all worked. But yeah, like there was one moment like, oh, the two characters, one of them says to each other like, oh, it's been 4 months or whatever. Like I think that's what you were talking about, Chris, where like the time frame of this all, like of the entire story happening, like was not quite clear. Like could be a little mud, could be a little like how did they get there and how much time has passed exactly? Like I know exactly what you mean there, but otherwise, like it didn't really detract that much, though I did notice it is all. Oh, other than that, yeah, I'm giving it a solid one. In I guess I'll say it here. My favorite joke is, of course, like one of the in my mind, I was like that is such a classic Mel Brooks gag. So early on, Frank Jeff's characters go like he's walking down the street and like it cuts to like the name of the street and it's like Marx, comma Lenin, and Trotsky is crossed off. And I
Yeah.
was like, that's really fucking funny.
Yeah.
Like, you get that. So like I'm like spot on, like, and there's other little moments like that. Just like that's the one that got me. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to give a 0 in style, and like not that this is like not his most bombastic film. Not that it has to be either. Just that it's a little more subdued, a little more toned down, but it still looks beautiful. It's shot great, and it all works. And like you said, Steve, the way like another good example that you were talking about specifically is when how characters interact. So when they're in the castle and he's like, I'm gonna go to the police, he's like, no, wait. And like the way that shot is framed and like the way the characters are standing and where they are in the scene is very classic Brooksian as well to me. So yeah, like it all does work quite well. Like maybe the third strongest one on this film, but definitely a one, no doubt.
And Scott, that is why that I put that nitpick, the editing nitpick, into plot, because there's no way I was giving style a 0, so I had to put
totally like I get it, Chris, but yeah, I just feel like we do have to we just have to mention like that little aspect because I think we noticed it. Like it's not just in the background, like if it's easily noticeable, but although it doesn't totally break your immersion or anything, but it is there. So that's all.
and I'm glad you brought up the Marx Trotsky Street, because we were eating lunch. When I saw that and like my food almost went spitting right out of my mouth. I thought that was brilliant. And
it's so classic and it's so funny. It's so Mel
Of
Brooks.
course it was you that remembered it. So thank you, dude.
Yeah, that was great.
All right, Scott. So why don't you keep talking about recommendations?
All right, this one's a little iffy too. Like, I personally enjoyed this film. Is it my favorite Mel Brooks film? Like, instantly, no. Like, of course not. I don't know. Like, yeah, it was a good romp, and it's interesting as hell, especially if you're want to check out some of his early work. That again might surprise you that it's not quite in the vein of like again Spaceballs and Men in Tights and Dracula and whatever, like right, those kinds of ones. His latter ones. But it is a well done, well written, well acted, and well shot film, as we all just said. I'm not sure, like, I would recommend it in like a smaller circle, just because I feel as if most people might, if not bored by it, just be like, "This is a Mel Brooks film. Like, it's not that funny." Like, okay, maybe not, but like, it's still a good film, and it still has funny parts, like the thing we just said. So it might be a very, very soft 0. Or I could give it to a soft 1 even, but I'm just saying like that's how I feel. Think of it as in my own mind. Like if we were talking about it, if it came up in conversation, would I be like, "Oh man, you have this early Mel Brooks genius"? Like it's good, and again, it's fascinating to watch, like to cut it up, to think about and sort of dissect. But I'm not quite sure I would fully recommend it, so I'm sort of a bit wavering, maybe 60-40 on it. So what do you boys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would recommend it. I feel like I'm gonna be like, oh, you like Spaceballs, check out this other movie, see what you think of this. Or like I'm gonna be like, yeah, check out Mel Brooks, like early on in his career is like such a different thing, but still like still recognizable. I think whatever. So I think I probably am going to go with a recommend on this, although I completely understand why you would say, a 0 on it, Scott. So that's me.
I'm giving this a 1. One thing I forgot to mention style was the sound design. I thought the sense of, I mean, you could tell when they went from location to set, but the sense of where you were in a room, I'm quite fond of and very aware of like sound design, like when you hear footsteps, footsteps,
Yeah.
and and yeah, I'm quite I thought it was a solid, really well done movie, and and even to like, and this is one of the things I love about Brooks, and I'll shut up in 1 second, but like Spaceballs is not a film like I love, but I loved that he was ahead of this time when it comes to pop culture, and marketing and merchandising, because that's how Lucas, that's how Lucas made his money off of Star Wars, was merchandising. So I really think it's really interesting. I think that's, again, whether you like a work or not is subjective, but I think he has always a really interesting way of putting his finger on the culture, even if as this was based upon another work. So yeah, it is definitely a worthwhile hour and 90 minutes worth of film. So yes, recommended.
I still might stick with the 0. Like maybe I'll let you guys recommend it for me, and that'll be like it be incorporated in the average when we do it in a second. But I don't know, like I enjoyed it. Like I said, like I feel weird saying 0, but I just don't think I would like advocate for it so much. And then if I'm going to like rewatch a Mel Brooks film, or I probably wouldn't watch this one again, like only for like, and again, it's going to sound backhanded, but I don't mean it to be as such, like for historical purposes more than entertainment purposes, even though I do think it was a good, entertaining film regardless. I think I'm going to play curmudgeon in this one and temper it back just a little bit and give it a soft 0, even though I personally did enjoy it to a fair degree, but I probably won't be like spouting like, oh man, you got to see this early Mel Brooks film. Like, yeah, it's interesting. You might enjoy it, but you might not, like depending. So I think it's a little more iffy there, a little more gray area. So I'm going to stick with a softer-ish 0 officially.
All right, fair enough. So I'll divvy out the scores. You and Steve-O each gave it an 8, and because of a pick flip, I gave it a 9. And being as with my buddies here are both gamblers, especially Scott, one cannot go back on a
Totally
pick,
fun.
on a game of chance, which leaves us with a score of 8.33.
I think that's pretty much like exactly what it should be, really. Like I think we gave Robin Hood a 9. You guys gave Young Frankenstein an 8.5 or 8.75 maybe, or something like that. Like just
no, we give it. Yeah, go on.
8. All right, I don't remember, but it's right within range is all I'm saying. Like 8.3 sounds perfectly fine, and I'm okay with that score. And I'm kind of glad that I maybe tempered it back because I don't think it really deserves more than that, but that's a pretty damn good high score, and it's fine.
Yeah. Like I said, Young Frankenstein's my favorite Brooks film and one of my favorite films of all times, but this is definitely, I think, a worthwhile effort. And if you are going to look at him canonically, you do see, all the little nuances of his filmmaking.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have anything to add before I wrap this up?
No, man, I think that's it. Like, it was solid enough. And if what we said appeals to you, then do check it out. And if not, like, I don't want to say again, you're not missing much, but it's not like you have to see this one. But if you do, I think you'll get an okay to good,
Scott froze for a minute.
Scott froze for a second. A good what?
I said you're gonna an okay to good romp out of it, pretty much. Like, and that's the score we gave it. I think it's pretty on target, and yeah, so I'm satisfied.
Cool.
All right. Well, that leaves us with the 12 chairs. I've been Chris Morgan, Dos Vidania. I've been here with my comrade Stephen Hermosi.
See you later.
And our comrade Scott Thurlow.
In glorious future, there'll be only synthetic fuel genre, like you said, comrade. Thanks for joining us. Good night and cheers.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.
Or Mott's?